Electricity can be a byproduct of providing industrial process heat, a byproduct of desalinating seawater, a byproduct of reducing the lifespan of nuclear waste, and a byproduct of valuable fission products. This is an energy revolution to be driven by manufacturing, a need for clean water, and the anti-nuclear movement's own fear-mongering over spent fuel rods. Such a future isn't very hard to imagine, just as Kennedy could easily articulate broad mission parameters for Apollo 11 by saying,
"We choose to go to the moon."
A future of energy abundance is already part of our pop culture. It's called Star Trek. First airing in 1966, it took the concept of abundant clean energy and ran with it.
The thing I liked about Star Trek was that it gave you hope that there was going to be a positive future, because it was taking place 300 years in the future. I mean, at the time there were race riots that were going on in my town of Cleveland, strife and pollution, and here you had this civilization that was really healthy. It was exciting, and they were pretty much at peace.
Do you inherently become a better society just because you have access to a more advanced form of energy?
I've read some of Gene Roddenberry's writings and some of the other writers and their feelings when they were doing the show. Yeah, they were talking about dilithium crystals and warp drive for the starships, but basically it was a nuclear-powered society. And that's how we were able to become peaceful and live with each other and be able to develop a civilization.
Miss Nichols, there's someone who wants to meet you. He's a great fan of yours. And I expected to turn around and see some young person, and I turned around into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he said, "Yes, I'm a big fan of yours." And I said, "Thank you very much." And of course, I'm leaving the show after this first year. And he said, "You cannot." And I was taken aback, and I beg your pardon. He said, "Don't you know who you are? Don't you know what you have? A character with dignity and beauty and intelligence." He said, "Your most important input is for everyone who doesn't look like us, who sees us for the first time as we should be seen, as equals, in peaceful exploration. Nichelle, you cannot leave."
Every time mankind has been able to access a new source of energy, it has led to profound societal implications. The Industrial Revolution and the ability to use chemical fuels was what finally did end slavery. Human beings have had slaves for thousands and thousands of years. And when we learned how to make carbon our slave instead of other human beings, we started to learn how to be able to be civilized people and how to use machines to do what we need to do instead of make other people do it.
Based on a utopian future of the 60s, this was where some of us were convinced we were headed. Technical realizations we've made since then are pretty simple. Fusion is hard, fission is easy, it can even happen in nature. Coolant choice is important. Nuclear fuel can be liquid.
Aye, the haggis is in the fire for sure.
It is hard to create a TV show about space exploration without breaking the rules of physics. The stars are just spaced too far apart. But manned exploration of our own solar system, permanent outposts on the Moon and Mars, and sending a probe under the ice of Europa, those are all doable with everyday fission of a non-water-cooled variety.
Extract the water from the soils of Mars, separate the hydrogen and oxygen. We now have a supply of rocket fuel on Mars, a fill-in station, so you don't have to carry all your fuel with you.
Back on Earth, Star Trek features high-density human population, unspoiled nature, access to ridiculous amounts of energy, and apparently no resource constraints worth fighting over.
Give me a martini straight up with 2 olives for the vitamins.
Gene Roddenberry had a vision of the future where mankind had overcome many of its problems and desired nothing more than a peaceful quest for knowledge.
Must be kind of boring, ain't it?
A lot has changed in the past 300 years. We have eliminated hunger, want.
Then what's the challenge?
The challenge is to improve yourself, to enrich yourself.
Is this vision of prosperity and nature as doable as sticking a nuclear reactor on a probe and melting through ice?
I've said this many times, I want to go ice fishing on Europa.
It has had an ocean of liquid water that's been liquid for billions of years. At every place on Earth we find liquid water, we have found life. I want to go ice fishing on Europa. Lower submersible.
So is this doable? Is an ecologically sound Earth compatible with 8 billion people living healthy, dignified lives, chasing their full human potential? Or is this just another fantasy component of Star Trek, like warp drive and teleportation?
We're going to exhaust every option until we finally get clear that actually what matters is making clean energy cheap, so that we can live in a world where we mostly live in cities, we have high-intensive agriculture, we've got clean energy, we've got clean water, we've got recycling your materials. That's a vision of a world where we can all live modern lives, and it does not require any science fiction.
Human beings have done amazingly well over the last half century. In 1950, there were just 2.5 billion people on Earth. Today, there's more than 7 billion of us. Everywhere infant mortality has been going down, and almost everywhere people are living longer lives. Unfortunately, all of our success has come at a high cost to the natural world. The number of wild animals on planet Earth has declined by half since 1970. It seems like we're always using nature in some ways, but humans save nature by not using it. It's the part of the Earth that we don't use that we leave to wild nature. Humans use about half of the Earth, half of the land surface of the Earth, the part of the Earth that's not underwater or under glaciers. Of that half, about half of the human impact is meat, or 24% of the Earth's surface. Another 10% is crops. Another 9% or so is for wood production. And this is really amazing. 3% of the Earth's surface we use for cities and suburbs, for the places that we live. And what's important about that is that now half of all humans, 3.5 billion of us, live in cities and suburbs. And this is going to prove to be a crucial part of how negative impact will peak and decline this century. If we take the right actions today, the overall size of the human population and our overall negative impact on the natural world could peak and decline, not by the end of this century, but within a few decades. Many of you know that whaling was a huge industry in the early 1800s. Mostly we hunted whales for their oil. We used their oil as energy to light up our lamps. Grand ball given by the whales in honor of the discovery of oil wells in Pennsylvania. We save nature by not using it. We saved nature by not needing it. We didn't need the whales anymore. We had a better substitute. It was kerosene made from abundant and cheap petroleum. And we didn't save the whales by using whales more sustainably. We didn't save the whales by having more efficient lighting to burn the whale oil more efficiently. We saved the whales by not hunting them. This is New England in 1880. There was only 30% of it forested at that time. Most of the rest was farmland. This is New England today, 80% forested. Martha's Vineyard was really a large sheep farm in 1900. Today, it's mostly forested. The forests are growing back. Why? Farms went bankrupt. We mostly didn't need them for their land anymore. We became more efficient at growing more food. We grew more food on less land. We saved all of that nature, allowing the forest to grow back because we didn't need it. Look at this beautiful green forest that surrounds Hong Kong. Hong Kong is only able to save that beautiful nature because it doesn't need it for growing food or for using it for energy. And they've made an incredible city, and people worry, they say, well, if you go to the city, you're alienated from nature. But look, they can walk into nature from Hong Kong. Nature's right there. That sounds nice for Hong Kong, but what about poor countries? What about developing countries? What about all the slums? And we're talking about industrialization, about factories where the conditions are terrible and people are treated miserably. That was certainly my view. 20 years ago, I was involved in an effort to hold Nike and other corporations accountable for their labor practices in other countries, particularly in Indonesia. It was a successful effort, and Nike did make some improvements, but 20 years later, I wanted to go back. I wanted to see what had happened to the workers. Had their lives really improved materially? And I met this young woman. Her name is Suparti. She makes 4 times more money than the people back in the village farming rice. We're growing much more food on much smaller amounts of land. It's one of humankind's most extraordinary achievements with great benefit to the natural world. We use half as much land per person globally to provide our food. It's only possible for Suparti to live in the city as long as she doesn't need to make her own food, and we're making more food for more of us. In the countryside, when you're a poor farmer, you need a lot of kids to help you work on the farm. You need a lot of kids to help you in your retirement. In the city, you can invest more in fewer kids. And that trend is consistent around the world. As women become more powerful, more educated, as they have more income. Her grandmother had 13 children. Her mother had 6. And you can see it right here. We don't know what's going to happen next. There's one scenario where we keep going up, another scenario where we go down. The high population estimate, the estimate where the world goes to 16 billion or more by the end of the century, is a world of low energy, wood, dung and charcoal, and large families, mostly in the countryside. A world where the population peaks at 8.5 billion and then declines by the end of this century is a world like Suparti is living. Higher energy, smaller families, more development, and more opportunity. This is Maisha. She is one of the 900 remaining mountain gorillas left in the world. She, as a baby, grew up in Africa's oldest national park in the Congo, called Virunga. In 2007, her parents and much of the rest of her group were killed by men making charcoal for energy. Since then, there's been well-meaning efforts to plant trees to help people in the region burn wood more efficiently, and the situation has only gotten worse. When we visited in December of last year, this is an aerial photo that we took high above the park. You can see here, illegal charcoal burning in the park. Why? Because people need it. Over 90% of the people depend on wood for fuel. We didn't save the whales by using whales more sustainably, by using whale oil more efficiently. We saved the whales by using a different kind of energy, by using a substitute. Suparti uses propane. What we use as camping fuel, similar to the natural gas that we all enjoy. It's an important substitute for the 3 billion people that still depend on wood and dung. As more of us move to the cities, we're going to consume more energy. For everybody to live at a moderate living standard, at basic material needs met, the world is going to need to triple and perhaps quadruple the amount of energy it produces from today. Propane is a fossil fuel. What are the clean energy options? There's not many. There's solar, there's wind, there's a little bit of geothermal, there's hydroelectric dams, and there's nuclear power plants. And solar and wind are wonderful. I've spent much of my professional career advocating for more solar, for more wind, including wind farm off the coast of Cape Cod. But solar and wind alone cannot power Shanghai at night. And there's a lot of exciting developments in batteries, but we are so far away from being able to power cities on batteries. Geothermal is great where it's available, and it's not available in many places. Hydroelectric dams have mostly been built in the rich world. We've mostly dammed our rivers, and even in places like China, many of the rivers have already been dammed. That means that we have to take a second look at nuclear power. When I was a boy, my aunt took me every August to Bittersweet Park, where we would remember the Hiroshima bombings. We would light candles and put them on paper boats. I saw a television movie about the aftermath of nuclear war. I was anti-nuclear my entire life.
1 million people dying right now or have died because of Chernobyl.
You know, I found myself quite disappointed in myself, and and honestly quite angry at others who were propagating that myth.
More people have died from Chernobyl than in the Black Plague.
Fear is a really important emotion, but if we allow fear to drive us, we can end up making decisions that actually put us at greater risk.
What's so striking is just to go read the original World Health Organization documents and read the public health reports. It was a complete shock to me. I mean, I'm reading all the Chernobyl stuff and I kind of am not believing it because it was so out of sync with what I had come to believe.
The biggest medical conspiracy and cover-up in the history of medicine, George.
In order to believe that 1 million people were killed by Chernobyl, which is what Greenpeace and Helen Caldicott, a number of other people claim, you have to believe there was a cover-up of just massive proportions by the World Health Organization, by the United Nations, by literally hundreds of the world's top public health experts.
Close down all those reactors now with solar and wind and geothermal. Forget about all the data and the figures and stuff. Listen to your intuition and you'll know what you've got to do.
And then I confronted this data and the challenge of meeting global energy and development needs and also dealing with one of our most serious environmental problems. And I've changed my mind.
On top of that rock, there must be 500 sea lions on top of that rock right now.
This is a nuclear power plant in California. You can see here all around it, natural life, sea life exists because nuclear power is zero pollution. And one of the things we've learned about energy production is that what you want from an environmental perspective is that you want the least natural resource in, the least amount of fuel in, the most amount of energy out, and the least amount of pollution and waste. You can't walk alongside a coal plant and not be affected by the smoke. You can with nuclear. How do humans save nature? Moving people out of their dependence on wood and agrarian poverty, moving away from large families to medium-sized families, access to modern energy so that forests are spared, so that forests can grow back from agriculture. The final step, moving towards small families, universal prosperity, and nuclear energy. Today we use half of the earth for nature. Can we leave 75% for nature? We're going to need more land for cities, but given current trends, higher energy, smaller families, more development, and more opportunity, we can drastically reduce how much of the earth we use for wood, crops, and meat production. Can we do it? I think we can. Why am I so confident? Because we've done it before. Thank you very much.
Split, don't emit! Split, don't emit!
What you see behind you are real environmentalists. We're not caught in some dogma from 40 years ago, and that's why they placed the goal of beating climate change above the goal of building a bunch of solar and wind.
Today, the case for nuclear is being made by environmentalists, engineers, scientists, and specifically climatologists.
I thought nuclear power was dumb.
And I was an anti-nuclear campaigner.
I found out that it is a zero-carbon power source. I thought the opposite. I was wrong.
I used to be strongly opposed to nuclear power.
I was appalled by it. Well, nuclear power was evil. I didn't want to go there.
I do have empathy for the people who disagree with me because I was that person.
People who once opposed nuclear power are the ones speaking the loudest and the clearest.
I understand where you're coming from because I went through the same process. You can reach people.
And their message is resonating.
On opening night, I polled the audience and I asked the same question after the film, and that was the response.
Common Sense says,
I'm Robert Stone. I'm the director of Pandora's Promise.
Explaining the value of nuclear power shouldn't be this easy. If it was, the industry would have done it already.
Have you received any funding from the nuclear industry at all?
No, absolutely not.
But the nuclear industry is not properly incentivized to solve obvious problems like explaining what fission is to the public.
I would be a complete idiot to have ever taken a dime from the nuclear industry or anybody associated with the nuclear industry.
It's an industry that's forgotten to sell its product. And no other industry acts that way. You know, there are warm and cozy natural gas advertisements on TV all year long encouraging me to buy their product. Airlines, you know, show you pictures of people on beaches. Part of the anti-nuclear narrative is the big bad nuclear industry.
Doctors can't lie. We would be deregistered. I would be deregistered. I would be deregistered. I would be deregistered. And they haven't sued me. And they haven't sued me. So I'm right.
However, in my experience in advocacy and outreach, actually standing up for yourself and being proud of what you do tends to work quite well.
Making it clear that nuclear power is carbon-free energy.
Nuclear power is essentially carbon-free energy.
Or even addressing people's concerns about fuel rods. For example, nuclear power plants have been paying into a DOE nuclear waste fund for 35 years. Permanently housing nuclear waste was not the responsibility of utilities or the nuclear industry. It was the responsibility of the Department of Energy. Nuclear plants paid into the waste storage fund based on how much energy the reactors produced, not how much waste they produced. That's like trying to reduce pollution by paying a head count carpool tax instead of a per gallon gasoline tax. How effective in fighting pollution would a carpool tax be? There's no nuclear industry incentive for addressing the public's fear. No incentive to communicate that solutions even exist. Instead, put nuclear plants into early retirement and free up the billions locked away in their decommissioning funds. Such perverse incentives have turned an industry once capable of crystal clear communication into the punching bag of fake environmentalists.
Nuclear power produces a substantial amount of global warming gas.
Nuclear power produces massive quantities of global warming gas.
In fact, a nuclear power plant will produce the same amount of CO2 in toto as a gas-fired plant, so you may as well just use gas.
Carbon footprint of nuclear is much higher than wind and solar.
Everything pales in comparison to nuclear.
If the industry wants to correct misinformation directly, they can do it.
Up and at them.
Up and at them.
That is a $100 million communications challenge.
Up and at them.
Up and at them.
For a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Up and at them.
Up and at them.
They haven't sued me, so I'm right.
But they haven't done it.
An AP1000, it's called an eggshell reactor. In the industry, so it could easily have an accident. It's very dangerous.
And I don't think they're going to do it. There are growing markets for conventional nuclear around the globe, and we are not living in one of them. As everyday middle-class citizens, we can still advance the cause of clean, abundant energy without the help of the nuclear industry. That's because anti-nuclear propaganda depends on a single, easily discredited message.
Safe and sound.
That all nuclear power is the same.
Thorium, reprocess, then make the fuel rods with uranium-233 and put them in the reactor.
As if all cars were wood-paneled station wagons.
There she is. Where? Right here, the wagon.
Correcting that misconception takes people to a new space.
It convinced a lot of people in the audience that thorium was a safer alternative.
Who presented that?
When they haven't yet explored, and where they haven't yet formed a strong opinion.
I assumed, like most people, that the existing light water reactor was a kind of a static technology and there would be some incremental improvements to it, like we improve all kinds of things, but there wouldn't be a fundamental change in the reactor concept itself. And when you present that to somebody who's been anti-nuclear their whole life, they go, huh? And they think, that's why thorium, like, oh, do you know that you could power a reactor with thorium? They go, what's that? Well, they don't know what it is, but they know it's not uranium and then it's plutonium. It's thorium, oh, that sounds nice.
And people are generally open to something new and better rather than, oh, the thing that you've been hating for so long is really not that bad. I think it's an easier sales pitch. And also, quite frankly, the light water reactor isn't like a horror show by any stretch of the imagination. But what we have is, molten salt is just so much better.
There's nothing taboo about molten salt reactors. People don't realize that water is just a choice, and that molten salt is already used today in solar energy collecting towers.
Anti-nuclear groups, the thing they most attack most vociferously, if you see the attacks against my film, it's about the fourth generation stuff. It's like, this is bullshit, it doesn't exist, it's all exaggerated, it's all problems, it's like they've tried this for years, it's always been a disaster. They go after that because it's the most effective deconstruction of all of the things that we object to nuclear power.
Helping people identify exactly which component of existing nuclear technology is responsible for their concern, and how we can build something better than what they fear, speaks to everyone's faith in our ability to solve problems. Talking about advanced nuclear is not doing the same thing and expecting a different result. It is a new approach driven by people outside the conventional nuclear industry, and we're finding that it works.
We're all part of this broader movement that's changing the way people perceive nuclear technology, that's redefining what nuclear power can be.
I think in a 5-minute conversation, I can open somebody's mind, and talking about next generation reactors is the way to do it.
Some folks can start off simultaneously opposed to nuclear power and advocates of thorium energy. This contradiction sorts itself out the moment they start fact-checking a caldecott. Thousands of people learn about molten salt reactors every day in somewhat excruciating levels of technical detail. The PDFs are all public domain. The technical lectures are all free. The molten salt research conducted in our national labs can be piggybacked on by anyone. I started learning myself when I stumbled upon some Google Tech Talks in 2009. Casually, part-time, for the next 2 years of my life, I tried to figure out why molten salt reactors were a dumb idea. Eventually, I realized not only were molten salt reactors a pretty good idea, but nuclear power itself was nothing like I'd imagined. To anyone concerned about the environment, poverty, exploration, or just untapped human potential, this stuff is inherently compelling. People are drawn to it, just like every other source of clean energy.
I'm a huge advocate of geothermal energy and also a sort of long-standing environmentalist, and was very against nuclear till quite recently when I started to realize that all of renewable energy in the world doesn't even come close to stacking up to our energy demand. Then the final tipping point for me was actually, opera singers sang about thorium reactors, and I was like, wow, these people care a lot about nuclear energy. There must be something behind that.
We could have far more clean energy. We can have next generation nuclear, thorium reactors that have no risk of meltdown. The Energy Department are just committed to regulating existing nuclear. There's next generation nuclear, thorium reactors. That could be encouraged, and market-based American solutions that clean the air, reduce emissions, and grow jobs and make us a more secure country.
Thorium has the potential to make nuclear energy much safer and more efficient.
I think it's natural to re-examine your beliefs as you age up. Nuclear is the best way to go for energy for the future.
You and I are religious fanatics, or have been, about anti-nuclear. Nuclear is bad. And we are the ones who should lead the discussion.
I remember the intensity of the nuclear debate, and I was on the other side of it.
This administration does not support the Department of Energy's Advanced Liquid Metal Reactor program and will oppose any efforts to continue the funding for this reactor project.
But given this challenge we face today, and given the progress of fourth-generation nuclear, go for it. No other alternative. Zero emissions.
We all know that there isn't 4 hours of sun here in Michigan every day, and so on those days there's no sun. How am I warming up my pizza?
You don't have to explain what the promise of abundant clean energy means. Everyone understands this concept. We're just introducing a very real technology that can actually deliver.